Hello there, and this is just a little impromptu thing. MK and I have been sort of batting a few ideas with the Presup thing he's presenting here and there. Can't say that I'm brilliant on philosophy, but I think I've got a reasonable hang on this, and I'm just going to get it. There you go. So, yeah. So how are you doing, first of all? You having a good day?
Yeah, I don't know how long I'll be able to stick around, but yeah. How about you?
Not too bad. I play a video game called Elite Dangerous, and there's a upgrade for it coming literally in a matter of minutes, hours, who knows. They're updating the server right now, so as soon as that's done, it's like, yeah, you're going to spend the next few days playing a video game because it's good. Anyway, either way. So, yeah, we've been batting this thing backwards and forwards with this Presup thing you're presenting, and I think it's about argument. And the thing that I want to point out, most importantly, is that we're both in the same situation. This is a no-score draw, effectively. And I think if you're trying to win something, you're mistaken, I suppose. I think you're barking up the wrong tree. So what you've been saying is you've got this Presup argument. What is your argument? What do you think that you've got that works?
Okay. From what I understand about the basically, I'm not super well informed about what the Presup argument actually is. So my main references about what the argument actually says is I've chatted with Jimmy Stevens before. I have watched Sci 10 stuff, and I've heard Darwin's deity or EF or DD, say various things. So based on those three references, that's kind of what I have formed about what my view is of what the Christian Presup is. And personally, I wouldn't call myself a Christian presupper because I find it problematic, as far as what I know about it so far. I find it problematic as far as addressing other worldviews that have gods that could do the same thing for them, is what Sci says, for example, or Jimmy or Darwin's. I think they might all say the same thing about the Christian God, basically gives people reason. But I find that to be a little problematic as far as what I know now about it, because why, to me, Allah can just give people logic. Yahweh of the Jewish tradition can give people logic. Zeus can give people logic. So as far as like comparing, as far as the Presup thing in comparison to other religions, I find it to be problematic. But as far as comparing the Christian Presup to the atheist perspective, in that regard, in my opinion, I think that it trumps the atheist perspective, though.
Okay. You see, the biggest problem with the Presup argument, and it comes in the name. It's presuppose something. You're not saying, well, based upon what we can see, we can conclude this. But they're jumping the gun. Effectively, they're using circular logic. They're saying, God exists. The Bible says God exists, and we get the knowledge about God in the Bible, so therefore God exists. It's completely circular. And it doesn't actually provide it because it's presupposed. If you have to presuppose something, then you can't have any real evidence for it. And if you can presuppose God, I can presuppose anything, including unicorns and Spider-Man. So it's very problematic. And the main thing when it comes down to it is, effectively you're claiming to know that you know because of the strength of your convictions. And unfortunately, you can't claim to know something if there's no way to demonstrate it. And how do you demonstrate it?
Well, as far as that question goes, I think that I think that as far as like compelling people or convincing people or persuading people, if they don't see a demonstration, then yeah, they're probably not going to be, well, it seems to me that they might not be persuaded. However, at the same time, I think people should also recognize that a demonstration is not, it might be necessary to persuade, but it's not necessary to be true. For example, they're like a deist God, right? You know how people say there could be a deist God, but he just doesn't show himself to people or itself. So I think the same is kind of true. Like if let's take Psi 10. If Psi 10 did know the truth, if he knew the objective truth, he doesn't have to demonstrate it to anyone. Even if he didn't demonstrate it, that doesn't mean that because he's not demonstrating it, that he doesn't know the truth. All it means is he's just not demonstrating it.
Well, it just means that he's making a claim and can't justify it. That's the problem.
Okay, well, I think that he does justify it. I think he feels justified within himself, but he's not really, the justification that he's offering is a justification that people are just not buying or even being persuaded to accept as even a real justification.
There's something that is worth pointing out for you, because you mentioned Psi 10 a couple of times. I don't know if you know the claims that Psi 10 has said. He has actually declared that the purpose of his Presup argument, as opposed to the Van Til or something similar, his design is to shut mouths. It's to close the mouths of atheists. It's not an actual argument at all. It's just an attacking posture. What it's basically doing is saying, I'm going to make you justify your position. And if you ask me about mine, I'm just going to say, I don't do Bible studies with atheists. And that's his way of avoiding taking responsibility to having to demonstrate his position. And it's a dishonest tactic, because the irony of it is it's rather based upon the honesty of atheists, because atheists are prepared to say, we don't know something, but he is not prepared to say he doesn't know something. He just claims to say he knows something, and it's been revealed to him in a way he knows it to be true, but he will never demonstrate what the mechanism of that is. And one of the things I ask when I have discussions with Christians, and I think I may have asked it to you myself, when someone says they've had a revelation, I ask them, what is the mechanism of that revelation? Was it a voice in their head, a bit of scripture that just to really appealed to them and gripped them, or whatever, things of that nature. I always find that an interesting question to ask. But on the Presup thing, you keep talking about reason. How do you define reason?
Yeah, I have a loose definition of reason. I would just basically consider it like, I want to say like an intentional, when someone intentionally begins to think about something. I would consider, or to put the pieces together, like when someone's intentionally putting the pieces of a puzzle together in their mind to try to, come to something, like I'm even doing right now to form my sentence, I would consider that to be, to be using reasoning.
And I hate to hit you with it, but are you using your reasoning to understand that concept within yourself?
Well, Yeah, let me try to, because basic, so that's, yeah, so am I using my reasoning to just give you what my definition of reasoning was?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did just use a reasoning process, yeah, to kind of spit out my definition of reasoning.
Yeah. So, but how do you justify that?
Yeah, okay, so for me personally, I think that yeah, give me a second. I think it was important that I initially said this is my loose usage or definition of the word reasoning.
Mm.
And I think I was intentionally careful to say it was my loose, because people might have their own definitions of reasoning.
That was actually the reason why I asked, because I want to make sure we're talking on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah, and so basically, if the question is, how do I justify the things that I say? Or, like, how would I justify my understanding of what I proposed reasoning to be? How would I justify that that's even true? Otherwise, I would be in the same position as anyone else that I'm accusing of committing that error. Well, the situation would be that for me personally, God could, or God did actually, God made me know that the process that's going on with me is not a bad process itself.
Okay. Are your communications with God outside the realm of reason?
I don't think that they don't they could be, but they could also be using reason as well. Because to me, reason is just any time I feel my brain area being activated and I start thinking about something. Anytime that type of tingling sensation starts occurring and I start feeling my central focus kind of lifting up to my eye region in my brain area, I feel like that's when thinking or reasoning is occurring. And so the issue is not that process itself. The issue is how does someone know the validity of that process?
Well, that's your problem. I mean, the problem is when you say that your communications with God are outside the realm of reason, it sounds like you're, an animal instinct. Animals just react. Humans reason. You effectively, it puts you in a reactive instinct rather than like an animal, rather than a reason thing, and that's what humans do. Does that make sense? It's almost like the instinct to eat food and drink liquids and things like that. Your body has a natural function to do so. But if you're describing your reason outside of reason, then it's no longer reason, it's instinct. Does that make sense?
I'm not quite catching that.
If your communication with God is outside of the realm of reason, then it's not reason, it's instinct. You are only reacting to what what you think you're thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. the reason I was a little hesitant is because while you were talking, I was kind of thinking a bit about the prior answer that I had given you. I felt that I didn't really make clear enough my answer, so I kind of have the desire to kind of shape that up a bit. But to answer this current question you asked, and then maybe I could go back, is I believe that there could be situations where kind of what someone might call intuition. It's like a feeling, and for me, something can happen. Like, for example, if I get shocked, that's more of like I feel it. I feel like the jolt, and there's some type of like what's that word? Adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you suddenly get scared about something, it's like I feel it in my body, in my heart region, like in my central point right here. That's where I feel it. It's not really. It could be intertwined or connected maybe with the head region, which I would call like reasoning processes. But if someone were to just like shout right behind me right now, I'm trying to imagine like I would be, something would go on in my head because I would hear it and that would go through my head, but I would also feel it in this region. And so I think that there's times where God can communicate to people in a way that like takes this region. It could combine two regions, or sometimes it might even just be exclusively this region. So I'm just saying that to say that when you were asking what my communications with God are like, I don't think that they always have to be. I'm struggling to find an example where I've had an experience where it was just this region minus this, because off the top of my head right now, I really can't remember a situation where it excluded my reasoning being involved. And the whole reason I'm saying all this is because I thought you were kind of saying, no, so maybe I could jump back to answering the previous question, which is, am I using my reason to justify my reasoning? Well,
yeah. Like
the cognitive process, which is a phrase that I'm borrowing from Chaswald Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
I was chatting with him yesterday, and he brought up the phrase cognitive process or something, and I actually like that more than reasoning, because I feel like cognitive process is like more broad, maybe can cover more things. That's just how I view it. Because the reason I view it that way is because I said to him, how do you justify your reasoning with your reasoning? And he like got out of it by saying, I'm using reason to justify my reasoning. And I was like, they're the same thing. It's the same root word. And he said, no. And then he himself offered the phrase cognitive process. So he kind of indicted himself. And so I'm borrowing that phrase because I think it helps me illustrate my point better. So here's my point. Cognitive processes, I don't think are bad. It's just the question is, how does someone know that this process is like a factory line? That's what the process is. It's like a factory conveyor belt. How do they know that that conveyor belt is spitting out the objective truth for them? What if the conveyor belt is faulty and it's giving them not true information? So if someone wants to rely on that conveyor belt, they would have to know that the conveyor belt itself is fully functional and working correctly. And I do know that because God made me know that I can rely on my conveyor belt. Maybe not all the time, but in regard to some things, yes. But if someone doesn't know if their conveyor belt is working properly, then that's when I think that it's problematic for that person to rely on it.
If we take away the presupposition that God exists, could your conveyor belt be giving you wrong information that God exists?
Sorry, if we take away the presupposition that God exists?
You take away the presupposition that God exists. Okay, let's set a hypothetical situation for you. A thought experiment. So in this thought experiment, God doesn't exist. Could your conveyor belt be giving you false information that a God exists?
Well, honestly, that hypothetical scenario, it feels like to me would force me to be an atheist for the moment. And the
Okay.
well, hold on. Actually, no, it wouldn't force me to be an atheist. But let's just okay. So if there was no God, I could still believe there's a God.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If your thought process is, if your conveyor belt is saying there is a God, even though in reality there isn't a God, then you're still coming up with this reasoning, this cognitive process, in order to come to a conclusion that a God exists, even though, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And effectively, I suppose what we say, it comes down to, on one hand, you could have, God exists, your conveyor belt is giving you positive information, and if God doesn't exist, then it's giving you information that is wrong. How can you tell which is which?
Yeah, and I actually, well, let's say that a God didn't exist, as in a creator being, but let's say that there were supernatural entities, like ghosts.
Okay.
Let's say that ghosts had the power to make people know if their cognitive processes were functioning correctly. So that could be one way that someone could know. But if we, so, I'll just keep it simple like that. I guess that could be one way.
I mean, this really is what it comes down to. That, neither of us, because, this isn't atheism winning or Christianity winning. It really comes down to neither of us can be sure, can actually know, and can demonstrate that we know. Because that's the thing. The best we can do is feel that we know, think we know, rationalize that we know, that kind of thing. But we can't actually know. We can't justify that knowledge. We can only have an expectation based upon the information we've been given. But either way, it could be wrong, it could be right. We wouldn't be able to know the difference. We really wouldn't be able to know the difference. Do you think that's reasonable?
Okay, so I think the last thing you said, well, could it be reasonable? But before that, I think you said we wouldn't be able to know the difference. And I think this is what this is what I resonate with about what Sai's saying. I'm not fully on board with everything that Sai says, at least not yet, because maybe I just don't understand fully enough what he's saying. But at this point, I do want to agree with him about something. And I think he makes the point, if I'm understanding him correctly, that atheists tend to admit that the Christian God could possibly exist. So what Sai likes to do is to basically do what I perceive as an internal critique on the atheist worldview. Well, maybe not necessarily, because he wants to hold his presupposition, but let me put it like this. He's willing to kind of go along with he's willing to play by their rules for the sake of conversation to a certain degree, I think. So he'll basically address, the atheist worldview, or, people, because there's probably atheists who don't even grant that it's possible that the Christian God could exist. In fact, there are. I've spoken with some. But I think by and large, many atheists would grant it's possible. So what Sai says at that point is, in your own opinion just now, you said the Christian God could possibly exist. And then what Sai does is build a bridge from that possibility And then he says that the Christian God is capable of making people know the truth. So what? Okay.
The problem he has there is, as soon as he begins to make that second assertion on the top of it, he would have to justify that.
Yeah, and I think at this point, at least in my perspective, it would come down to people would have to have a common understanding of what the Bible teaches. And I think what Sai is relying on is the Bible describing God.
But that's the problem. Here we go. I mean, we've now got another problem, because as soon as you bring the Bible into it, you're then in a position of how can you be sure the Bible's true? How can you be sure the Bible exists? How, it comes down to the proper basic belief problem, that, let's chuck the whole brain in a vat concept in there. Let's imagine that you are nothing more than an AI program in a computer. Okay. And all your information that you have, everything you know, everything you've experienced is nothing more than, what someone programmed into the program. Okay. I am nothing more than a subprogram to interrogate your main program, to make you, see what happens. Now, how can you be sure that you're real at all? Everything, I mean, how can you be sure that you're real at all? How can you be sure that you have dark hair?
Okay, so I think that, I don't want to be like totally constantly referring to what Sai says, but and I'm not doing this in a way to like glorify Sai. The only reason I'm referring to him so much is because I feel like this is a conversation that revolves around the Christian Presup argument.
Yeah. And
I'm not as familiar with what other Christian Presuppers say, like Jimmy Stevens, D.D., Van Til, Bonson. I'm more familiar with what Sai says because lately I've been watching more videos. But as I already stated, I don't even fully agree with him about. So I'm not like worshiping this guy. I'm just referencing him because he's popular. And
to go to the how do you know you've got dark hair? You're an AI program. How do you know you have dark hair?
Okay, so here would be an answer. An answer would be that from the atheist, kind of to tie in the Presup argument here in my answer, would be from the, let's call it the atheist. It doesn't have to be just the atheist, but let's take atheists, for example. From their, what I view is from their point of view, they would say that we're just going to assume certain starting points, and then from those starting points, then we can map out reality. So I have dark hair, and, do we know if that's actually true? Well, that the question you're raising right there is actually the question that I think Sai tries to press atheists on, is that you can have these starting points and that's fine, but how would someone, we might be getting into new territory here and opening up a can of worms. Okay, so I think what he's kind of pointing out is that, okay, let me maybe backtrack a bit. I was listening to a clip of Ozzy the other day, and I think he said that I think Ozzy would say, I'm not 100% sure, so, forgive me if he ends up watching this, forgive me if I'm incorrect, and I'm just clearly stating I don't know if this is what he would say, but I think he might say that I don't know, or I wouldn't know if I have dark hair but according to my properly basic beliefs and how reality goes from that point on, I have dark hair. And
that's what but in the AI program thing, that's what the digital program is telling you to think.
And the question that you're raising is actually, I think the question you're raising actually supports the Christian Presup argument, though.
How?
Because it's kind of questioning that, yeah, you apparently have dark hair, but that's only because, like you said, the API, I think the API program is making you believe that. And so what Sai's trying to get to the heart of is what is the truth? Not what we believe, but what is the truth? And I think, yeah.
Well, this is where the problem lies, because, how are you able to figure out what the truth is? I mean, even reading the Bible, how can you be sure that what you're reading is accurate? Even the concept of, the description of God within the Bible, how can you be sure that's an accurate telling? I mean, I've said this a few times here and there. We can teach, gorillas and chimpanzees or whatever, basic sign language, so they can communicate with us in a language. But their ability to understand more than basic language is finite. They really don't have much ability. They can't learn mathematics and cosmology and physics and chemistry and things like that. Those would be just way over their head. So if we imagine a God exists, do you think that God would be able to transmit information into the minds of human beings? God that would be like massive compared to a human being's mind. How are they supposed to understand the magnitude of that? So your concept of a God may be quite different than an actual God.
Yeah, and that's where I think is a point that Sai addresses, because he says God can give us the truth in a way that we're able to understand the truth, so that we don't misunderstand it.
But his difficulty is that he never explains the mechanism for that. How is he able to know that? I mean, for example, and Alex Bottom said this some time ago to Arcane, I think it was. And he asked him, I could ask you the same question. How do you know that something else, Satan, is getting between you reading the words on the Bible and you getting the understanding in your brain?
Okay. Are you asking from the vantage point of someone who's currently a believer, or maybe not currently a believer?
Yeah.
So if someone's currently a believer, then I think they would probably say that that basically God is protecting them from Satan doing that to them.
But how can you possibly make that assertion?
And you know what? Honestly, I agree with you, because unless someone knows that that's true, it seems to me they're just believing that.
Yeah, I mean, I do find that tends to be the case. I believe because I have the conviction. But when you press people, it's very difficult. It really comes down to, I have faith. And I would rather have someone say, I have faith, that this is something, rather than I have proof or I know. Because unless you can demonstrate, it's only a claim. And if I was to say, I know unicorns exist, you would expect me to demonstrate it, I think. And I think that's fair as well. I think you should expect me to demonstrate something.
Okay, do you mind if I backtrack one
Sure.
second? I want to answer that question you asked, but I want to just rephrase my last answer. Is when I think I said something that I think most Christians would say that they believe God's protecting them from Satan hijacking their thoughts or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I had an image in my mind of when I was going to like Bible studies and hanging out with like, common Christian people. I think that's what they would say, but I think actually Sai would answer that differently, and he would say that he knows that Satan is not tampering with his understanding, because Sai is not really the typical Christian in my perspective, because I think, in my opinion, I think a lot of Christians believe stuff. I'm just giving my opinion. I could even be incorrect about that. But I think Sai is interesting because he says he knows stuff.
But he hasn't demonstrated it. I mean, the difficulty is when you say God is protecting believers from that, how can you be sure he's successful or not?
Well, let's say someone said, I don't know if God's protecting me. Well, that individual person, yeah, I feel like they would be in a problematic situation because they're just believing it. But someone like Sai, I don't think he would be in a problematic situation because he's not claiming to merely believe it. He's claiming to know it. And that gets into what your question was about. If you claim to know, what did you say, fairies, I would ask you to demonstrate it?
Unicorns, yeah.
Unicorns? Well, so if I said to Sai, okay, Sai, can you demonstrate that you know God is protecting you from Satan hindering your understanding when you read the Bible? How would you know that God is doing that for you, Sai?
And I think I already know his answer. His answer would be, I've been, what was it? It's been revealed to me in a way I know it to be true. The difficulty is that when he says that opens the door for, how do you know that Satan didn't reveal it to you?
And first of all, I want to say what I think his mechanism might be, which you were asking about earlier. Now, I don't want to, put words in his mouth, but he might say that, maybe the Holy Spirit has, made him know it or something. But then that's kind of just a little side point. But the main question you just asked was, well, how does he know Satan's not
The Holy Spirit.
Or the Holy Spirit? So I think that kind of gets back to earlier when basically, I think that, I don't know if you want me to answer from my perspective or what Sai would say. We might even share the same view, but
I actually think it's best for you to answer for yourself rather than to answer for someone else who you aren't.
Okay.
I always think it's best to be yourself rather than try to be someone else.
Okay. So my answer to that would be, I do personally believe that God can stop people from believing the truth. He can purposely hinder people from knowing the truth, even believing in the truth. Like, I do think he can do that. And I think Satan can do that. To be more specific, I think Satan can do that as well. But at the same time, I also hold that God can create a path or make people know the truth. So yes, there does exist a case where Satan can mess with people, but there also exists a case where God can make people know the truth. And so what I would say is, if you want to say, well, how do you know you're not just thinking you have the truth? My answer to that becomes something which I think people accuse me of being circular for, which is, if you know the truth, then you know the truth. You know Satan's not doing that to you.
But how can you possibly demonstrate that for yourself, let alone for me?
Okay, and so
feeling something, intuition is not reason. You use reason to interpret the intuition, not the other way around.
And so this is where, so far, I think that what I would say at this point, people might call circular. And at first I was opposed to having it, to admitting that I'm using circular justification. And actually, I'm not actually going to grant that I am using circular justification. But, I mean, I'll grant it for the sake of the argument, but I'm not going to admit that that is the case, because I think that maybe in the future, God will kind of make me know that maybe it's not circular. But here's my answer. Mm-hmm.
I do need to point something out just before you do.
Okay.
I think you're in danger of putting yourself into a position where you're basically saying that you know because of the strength of your conviction, and that's about all you have. I think it's a dangerous, it's, as you said, it is circular, and it's not something that can be demonstrated.
Okay, well, I would elevate it a little bit to more than just a conviction, because my personal understanding of conviction is it's like a confidence. Like, I have confidence that if I shoot this basketball, I'll make it, because I've been playing basketball for years. I view that as like a conviction, and I don't believe...
The conviction comes from the experience of doing it before, and it's basically built upon the construction of, okay, I've practiced, I've succeeded, so based upon that, I think I'm going to get it in. I have the conviction that I will achieve my goal.
Yeah, and I don't, in my situation, it's not limited to convictions, which kind of I just think are feelings. It just feels. That's how I personally perceive convictions. It's like feelings. I mean, maybe there's mental.
That's the intuition thing again. That's not conviction. That's an intuition. I think you're struggling with definitions of words here, or using the correct word for the right thought process.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't think I'm limited to convictions or intuitions or feelings, or I'm not limited to that stuff. I think that knowing is like, knowing is like, it gets into like a intellectual realm, I feel. And so, yeah. So like, if I were to know that Satan is not blinding my mind, for example, if that's something that I know, then it's just like, I know that. It's not just me feeling, or it's not just me being convicted about that. I actually know it.
Do you think that your presupposition has a greater meaning if you assert it strongly enough?
Do I think that my presupposition has a greater meaning if I assert?
Does it have a greater veracity, a strength?
Well,
if you say it strong enough, does it become more true for you?
Yeah, maybe.
Because that's a problem. Because I can, I can strongly say in as many ways as I wish that God doesn't exist. Does it make it true? Does it become the truth because of that?
No.
So you understand that what you're saying has as much power as what I just said. It has as much has as much to say about the truth as my claim.
Yeah.
You know, this is where the presupposition is a problem, because claiming something is something doesn't make it true. It just at best it might make it true for you.
Yeah. And
it really does come down to how do you make the justification to it for that position.
okay, here we go. The justification.
Yeah.
So the justification would be that if you were to read the Bible right now,
Yep.
I'm sure that you would probably come away with the conclusion that this God, you know, being that he's so powerful, that he could make, well, I don't want to say I'm sure, I don't want to assume anything, but I don't think it's a stretch or a far-fetched to say that even an atheist who were to read the Bible could come away with the conclusion that if this God existed, or not even if he existed, let's just say the atheist doesn't even grant that this God exists, but just for the sake of the storybook itself, I would guess that most atheists would say that this God or character would be capable of giving, let's say, Abraham the ability to know the truth.
Possibly. Yeah, maybe. I mean, but again, it still doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah, and this is, and I agree with you. And this is where I think Psi 10 is okay. So this, well, I don't want to talk about Psi 10. So let me so let me just say for myself. So if we can come together, you and me, and we can agree that not that this character exists, but that he has this ability to make people know that he could maybe possibly, like you said, make people know the truth, like Abraham. Well, so far it's just in a storybook. But now, now what I would do is so now it's still in the realm of just being a story. Mm-hmm. Okay. But now I would ask someone, okay, in reality, do you think it's possible that this storybook character is actually real? Do you think that's possible? And I think most atheists would say, yeah, it's possible that this character really exists. And so then, you know, we're building bridges here. Okay.
The difficulty I see with that, I mean, I've read the Bible 5 times. I think it's 5 times. It's at least 4, probably 5. I never, you know, I never got onto the believing part of it. It was always just a story to me, and it was no more, you know, it was really little more than cartoons and, you know, fairy stories for me. You know, it was no stronger than Harry Potter or Spider-Man or, you know, Lord of the Rings or any of that kind of thing. You know, I mean, I can you know, I can imagine a world where, you know, goblins and orcs and elves and dwarves and, you know, Saruman exist and things like that. But it doesn't mean to say that it does exist. And although something is based upon, you know, is based upon human beings, you know, Harry Potter, it doesn't mean to say that exists either. So I think that, you know, effectively, what makes something an actual possibility compared to a fantastical thing? Is it just the fact that lots of people believe this stuff and has done for a long time? And that's an ad populum argument.
Yeah, it would come down, because like I said, I've chatted with non-Christian believers who, to the best of my memory, have said it's not even possible that this character exists due to given reasons.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to address those atheists who would say that it is possible. So,
I mean, I think when atheists say those sorts of things, they effectively say, you know, it's possible that gods may exist, but we have no evidence, so we're going to go from a negative until it's been proven to be positive. It needs a justification, and it doesn't meet the burden of such a justification. The justification given doesn't meet the burden of evidence, and that's why atheists don't believe.
Yeah, and well, that's why they don't believe. However, okay, so I want to try to tie this back to the Christian Presup argument, if that's possible, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so if there are atheists who would say that, yes, I don't believe in this character because that he actually exists because it doesn't meet its, burden of evidence, so I don't believe it. However, hey, maybe he does actually exist. I don't know. So I kind of want to address those people. Or, actually, I might even be able to address people who don't even say it's possible. Yeah, I actually, that might not even be a big factor. So let me lump them all together.
I don't know whether it's your audio that's going funny or mine.
Hello? Hello?
I think it's going to be mine.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I'm not sure if anyone can hear me at the moment.
Yeah, I could hear you.
If you choose every now and again, I'm going to hit the refresh button just.
Can you hear me?
It seems to be on. Ah, you're back. Or am I back? Can you hear me okay? MK?
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, I don't know whether I disappeared or you disappeared.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good, okay.
I had to reload.
Ah, right. I wasn't sure if it was you or me that had the problem.
Okay. So what occurred to me is that I think it might not really be necessary to distinguish between people who say it's possible or not possible. I think the Christian Presup has no problem addressing people who would say it's not even possible, because basically I think what the Christian Presup is saying is that, okay, according to the storybook, we can maybe agree, just according to the storybook, that God has the power to make people know the truth, like Abraham or Isaac. Like God would have the power to just zap people, and then upon that zapping, the person would gain the ability to know the truth. Okay, so at that point, nobody has to believe that this God actually exists. For example, it could be someone's opinion that this God might not even possibly exist, but at the end of the day, it's just that person's opinion. But the fact would be that if this God existed, that we just agreed that he would have this power. He would be able to make people know the truth. So if this God existed in reality, then that would be an avenue by which people, believers and non-believers, could know the truth, because God could zap them and make them know the truth. Now, quickly shifting over is from let's call it the atheist worldview, but it's probably not exclusive to atheists. But let's just talk about atheists, though.
Well, I think from the atheist point of view, the negative version would be that God doesn't exist. The Abraham Genesis stories are nothing more than fables that have just been created to create a historical sense for the Hebrew tribe. And then, you got your later stories, which then develops into, the New Testament.
Yeah. So it's kind of just a storybook at this point. That's what
it is. I mean, effectively, that, I mean, my personal belief, if you want to call it that, my personal opinion on the Bible situation is that, I've said this a few times, human beings have this ability to, make stuff up, that 97% of statistics are made up on the spot, including the one I just gave you. I think that, people, if they don't actually have proper knowledge, they just make something up. And in order to make the, how did we get here kind of thing, people have fabricated gods to explain the hole in the knowledge. And that if the Bible is evidence of anything, it's evidence that the people who wrote it believed gods existed. It's not evidence of God.
Right.
And even if Jesus was a real person, which we cannot be sure of, from my point of view, I think he was probably just a radical, preacher, a radical rabbi, teaching a progressive message instead of the old Mosaic law, and that his followers basically deified him. There's no, we don't see, in reality, examples of walking on water and bringing people back from the dead or rising from the dead. I think those things have just been made up on the end of it to fulfill a prophecy that the Old Testament writers, the New Testament writers knew about from the Old Testament.
Yeah. And in order to see if that stuff is true, we would have to,
go back in time.
Go back in time, or, come to probabilities by, researching the past.
Yeah, but I mean, probabilities, the chances if I go out and cross the street and I don't look where I'm going, the probability is that I'm going to get killed. But that doesn't mean say I will get killed. It doesn't mean say that probability will fulfill itself. It could be that the people driving on the road that day were paying a lot more attention than normal, and as a result, they hit the brakes or swerved, and I didn't get killed. How many of these little instances do you see on these Russian dash cam videos where something nearly happened or a car nearly got hit but didn't quite, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that stuff is amazing.
Yeah, and scary as well.
Yeah, I know. I've actually
I think it makes both you and I glad we're not Russians.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that culture, but haven't really deeply looked into it, so can't say I'm all too familiar with life over there.
But again, it gets off the subject, doesn't it? I mean, really, what we're talking about, because it really, I mean, we're kind of going a long way around the same idea, really, the same concept, and it comes down to the proper basic belief. And, and as I said at the start, that it's a no-score draw, effectively, that neither of us can demonstrate that, our proper basic belief that we exist at all is based upon anything other than a conclusion drawn from the experiences that we have. And it's a necessary thing. To walk across the street, you look up the road and you see there's a car coming, and you say, well, it's going to take me 10 seconds to get from this side of the street to the other side of the street safely. So if that car's 15 seconds away, roughly 15 seconds away from me, I'll be able to get there across no problem at all. If it's only 12 seconds away, well, I might have to trot a little bit or something, so, things like that. So we basically draw a whole bunch of conclusions based upon the data that we've used in the past, that our faculties are what they are, that we can, that the car is real, that the road is real, that we're real, that we're not figments of our own imagination. Because if we did that, we wouldn't be able to function. For example, how would you be able to function if your memory erased itself every night?
Right.
You would have to sort of pick up from step 0 every day. And it's like, oh, who am I? Where am I? What's my name? And you end up having to, have a little book next to you or something like that. So you can basically read up on who you are first thing in the morning. But reality, would be incredibly difficult to live that way. So we have to have this proper basic belief that I exist, my senses exist, the universe exists, you exist, etc., etc. All those things, we have to presume them. We really do. And everything else, that is the foundation that we have. Now, neither of us can justify it. Even you, it doesn't matter whether you say you can justify it, you can't really justify it. I think if you're honest, you will accept that. But we have this foundation, and we basically build our house on top of that foundation. And really the foundation, we can't be sure whether it's good enough. We really, really can't be sure. We can say, well, given the probability of how things seem to work, it's a pragmatic approach. It seems to work, so let's go with it.
Okay, well, here's the issue that I see, is that you wouldn't be able to know whether I have a proper justification for my worldview or not.
Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, in order to be able to do that, you would have to justify it in the first place.
Yeah, so let's say I did justify it. Ultimately, you would have to pick up what I'm putting forth. And the way that you would receive what I'm saying would have to be filtered back through your own being and your own cognitive processes. And since you, I feel like by your own admission, can't be sure of what the truth is, well, I could be offering you a perfectly valid justification in reality, but due to your limitedness, you wouldn't be able to recognize.
Is that how can you possibly offer a justification? Because your justification would be based upon the precept that I already laid out, the effectively the primacy of existence. Not primacy of existence. The proper basic belief. You have to start from that. There isn't anything underneath it that you can say is something. You would need to justify that. I mean, when you said a moment ago, imagine I justified it. Well, how would you justify it?
Well, okay. So if I justified what I was saying by saying that I know that Jesus is God because...
Okay, now you've got a problem. How do you know?
And me personally, I can't speak. I'm not going to speak for Sai or any other presuppositional type of person. I know that Jesus is God because I have a partniscient nature.
What does that mean? Would you explain that word, partnition?
Yeah, that means that I know the truth, not about everything, because that would make me omniscient, but I know the truth in regard to some or various things.
And how? How do you know that truth? What's the mechanism of that truth?
The way that I know some stuff is it's through my nature.
Could you expand that a little bit? I don't understand. What I think you need to flesh that out a lot more. Through my nature doesn't really tell me a lot.
Chameleons are able to camouflage due to their nature.
Okay.
I'm able.
This is exactly what I was saying before about that's an animal instinct. That's not reason. That's not, that's, if it's an instinct, did you use your reasoning?
Did I use my reasoning to?
If it's an instinct, did you use your reasoning?
Well, I wouldn't classify what I'm presenting to you as my instinct.
Well, what is it if not? I can't remember how you said it now. You said it's within your nature. Well, that sounds like instinct. That sounds like the essence that is you. But what does that actually mean?
Okay, well, what that means is that there's a part of me that gives me the ability to know the truth.
And what is the mechanism of that knowledge?
What is the mechanism?
Yeah, how is this, how does it get from the nature of you to your knowledge, your understanding?
Then to my understanding, I think that it does. I think there might be a cognitive process involved. That might be a mechanism by which I come to get to the conclusion.
Well, cognitive is the ability of the brain to think and reason as opposed to feel. So when you say it's nature is the feeling part. Does that make sense?
Okay, well, maybe let me use a different term then.
Okay.
Due to my abilities. Okay, well, I have the ability to know the truth.
How?
How do I have that ability?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't born with that ability, I don't believe, although it might be possible that I was, but that's something I am not aware of. I'm not aware of that answer yet, but let's just say that to the best of my awareness right now, I wasn't born with that ability. I just recently acquired that ability, like recently.
Okay, and in what form? How do you know you acquired it? How do you know, where did the acquisition come from?
God.
And how do you work that out?
Well, there was a time where I was believing in God, and then roughly around maybe a month ago, a few weeks ago, that believing transitioned into knowing. And the transition, I believe, the bridge or the crossing over was because God reached inside of me and did some rewiring and gave me the ability to know the truth. And the way that I'm able to know that he did that was because now I know the truth.
Oh gosh, that's very circular.
Right, it sounds
incredibly bad.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, I mean, the difficulty is that knowledge is a subset of belief. You know, that you believe something is true, and you know, it becomes a part of that. It becomes self-confirming almost. So, for example, and I've used this elsewhere. Imagine someone stole something from me, but I thought it was you. I had a reasonable justification for thinking it was you because, I don't know, maybe, let's just say you had stole something from me before. Just using that as an example, you know, as a hypothetical situation. Not that I would think you would or anything, you know, but anyway. So, so what happens is, in my own mind, I know that you did it. But you didn't do it. It was somebody else. So even though I know something to be the case, it doesn't mean to say it was the case.
Right, and this is where it would get to a point where I'm probably not being terribly persuasive in what I'm saying, but I feel like now might be an opportune time to point out, however, that as far as your abilities, you can't actually know if what I'm saying is true or false.
Yes, and also I think, I mean, I think you're in a position where you can't know it's true or false either. You can only think it is or believe it is or whatever.
In your opinion?
Well, I think you've said it yourself in this discussion.
Well, I don't concede that I could be misled.
You don't think Satan could affect you?
I think that Satan could affect me maybe in certain ways, but in regard to this particular thing that I'm putting forward, no.
Okay. Now, how do you know that you have effectively forced yourself to believe something in a way? That, you know, you have become convinced that the Bible is true, and you looked up stuff and heard arguments, and now you've decided that you know it's true rather than just, you know, having effectively, at first you had a surface level of belief, and now your belief is much deeper.
Yeah. Something along the lines of maybe a self-affirmation, or
yeah,
even something as along the lines of that I just want to win arguments. And so I've figured out...
No, I think you wanting to win arguments is a side effect of you believing this is true. Because I don't strike you as being a deliberately dishonest person. You know, I think you're earnest in your belief, and that is why, you know, you project the way you do. But then again, we all kind of do that, including myself. You know, I mean, just to give you an example, 9/11 truthers believe it was an inside job and all that kind of stuff, you know. Now, they have convinced themselves, they have looked at evidence and discarded other evidence, and they have come to a conclusion. Now, are they able to demonstrate that that's what actually happened? Or are they just able to, you know, convince themselves that this evidence is useful and this evidence should be discarded, you know? And I find often that, you know, people that do such things subjectively choose things that either confirm or deny depending on their will.
Yeah, and of course, everything you just said, you can't know if what you just said is true,
And neither can you.
Well,
You
here's
can claim to. There's a difference.
well, I again, what you just said there, it sort of implies to me that you're kind of labeling my situation and saying, well, you can't know it either. But again, if that were the case, you would be saying something that, again, you wouldn't be able to know if it's true.
But then again, neither can you. The argument, everything that you say, the argument comes back. You know, for everything you say, it is true. The argument, yeah, but how do you know it's true? And it really always goes back, and it just goes back and back and back to that proper basic belief. And your whole reasoning, your whole system is based upon you having the idea that you exist and that you can gain knowledge from the Bible. You know, that's an example. How do you gain knowledge from the Bible? You know, well, you have to read the Bible to gain knowledge from it. But how do you know that? How do you know you're real and that the Bible exists? You don't know. You can only use a pragmatic approach based upon a proper basic belief that it seems to work, you know, and that I can read this book and gain knowledge from it.
Well,
but you don't know whether what the knowledge inside it is true or not.
Well, I do know that some, at least, maybe all, but I don't know if everything, I'm not aware if everything in the Bible is true, but I am aware that there are some things. I don't want anyone to mistake what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it could be the case that everything in the Bible is true. However, I'm only claiming to know that some things in the Bible are true. So I know, for example, that it's true that Jesus is God.
But when you say we're only claiming to know, are you conceding that you might be wrong? I mean, you know, you're still in a position where you think you know it's true. But in the same way as atheists, you know, as you said, atheists have said to you that it's possible God might exist. You know, I think it's. I'm going to tell my friend to go away. Give me a second. Sorry about that. Oh, I didn't say it quite as bad as it sounded, but anyway, yeah, I think if you're honest with yourself, you know, you will say that yes, although you believe you know it to be true, you cannot be absolutely certain it is true. You just have the strength of your convictions that it is, and it's on the same level as atheists say, well, it's possible God exists, but I don't think so.
Well, here's the difference. I know the truth, and I think the majority of atheists here on G+. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I don't move a huge amount.
You were very still.
Yeah, I do that.
So here's the difference. I know the truth, and this comes down to the Christian presuppositional argument versus the worldview that I think most atheists here on G+ would adopt. So let's compare the worldviews.
Okay.
I know the truth, and most atheists here on G+, I think, would concede that they don't know the truth.
But you say you know the truth, but you can't demonstrate it is the truth. Demonstrate it's the truth.
Okay. So demonstrate that what's the truth?
That you have the truth. Demonstrate that you have the truth. That God exists.
What would count as a demonstration for you?
I don't know. You tell me. You need to demonstrate to me that you have the truth. How would you do that?
Okay. Well, the for me, in my opinion, what I believe would be the best way would be if you knew the truth, then you would be able to fact check what I'm saying.
Okay, but how do I find out the truth?
I think the most effective way that you could find out the truth would be to ask God to make you know the truth.
I tried. Didn't do anything.
Well,
there's a bit in, I forgot which one it was. It's Matthew, I think it might be, but it's basically, if you ask, you will receive. Effectively, if you ask God to speak, if you ask speak to God to speak to you, He will. You only have to ask. I can't remember what it is. I can't remember the verse exactly. And I tried it. I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give it a try. And so I asked. I was honest when I said it. I even wrote it down, and I asked God, if you exist, if you're there, please reveal it to me in a way I know it to be true. I use the Presup argument, really. And I, and nothing happened. I didn't get anything at all. And I've used this. This is my reason for being an atheist, effectively. I have not had a revelation, and in the absence of a revelation, I take the null hypothesis: something doesn't exist until it's demonstrated to exist. To my satisfaction. Now, I wouldn't expect, it to be something that I can verify for everyone else. I would be satisfied enough for God to reveal it to me in a way that I know it to be true. A way, and any omniscient, omnipotent God, as the Bible depicts, would know what is required for me to believe, and yet hasn't been able to hasn't provided it. So I come to the conclusion that it doesn't exist.
Well, remember, in my view, there's a difference between believing and knowing. So if you wanted to fact check if I know the truth, then it wouldn't be merely enough to believe that the Christian God, to believe in the Christian God.
Well, I said it a way I know it to be true.
Yeah. And so let me answer that, is that I view myself as fortunate because I acknowledge that when I did ask God, because I don't know if I forgot if I mentioned this to you or not, but I actually asked God to make me know.
Okay. How did you ask? What did you ask? Was it a prayer and what was your knowledge? Where did the knowledge come from?
Okay, so I was a believer at this time,
mm-hmm.
and I wasn't satisfied with just believing.
Right.
And I was chatting with a friend, and the friend said, there are people that they know that God is real. And he kind of mentioned that to me in an aside type of comment way. It wasn't the focus of our conversation, but that idea stuck with me. And so after I was done chatting with him, I think even moments later, we were chatting on a hangout. After we ended the hangout, I wasn't in any other hangout or anything. I was just by myself in my room or with my dog. And something urged me. I felt urged to say to God, because I was a believer, So I felt urged to say to God, God, I want to know if you exist. And then, I think if I remember correctly, over the next few days, there was basically a moment where I was just sitting, and then the thought came to my mind of Psi 10, when he was, because I had watched a couple of clips or whatever of Psi 10 before this experience. So the image came to my mind, or the memory or the recollection, when Psi 10 was saying something along the lines of, you can know that God exists, or something like that. You know how he says, such that we can know he exists, or something like that. So the image that came to my mind.
It's been revealed to me in a way I know it to be true.
Yeah, I was just sitting there, and that came to my mind in my imagination, or whatever you call it, my mind's eye. And then I think, I don't know if I'm recollecting or these events exactly as I'm recalling them, but so then I think that the thought then following that image was the thought, or now you know that God exists. And so I think within the next few days after that, I don't know what the circumstances were, but there's a scripture in the Bible that came to my mind, in my mind's eye, in John, I think maybe the very last verse of John chapter 6. I think one of the very last verses in John chapter 6. I think it's one of the last verses. It's definitely towards the end. One of the verses towards the end there says something along the lines of, we have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God, or something like that, in reference to Jesus. So that came to my mind, and I wasn't reading that scripture currently, I don't think, to the best of my memory. It just kind of just came to my mind. I mean, because I read it in the past. So this, I have read the Bible in the past, so I'm not trying to say that I never read the Bible, but I hadn't recently been reading that or anything. And so that came to my mind. And I just took that as further confirmation from God that basically now I just knew.
I mean, to me, it sounds, from my perspective, it sounds like you wanted to believe so much that you found a reason to. I don't believe you cognitively thought this. I think you subconsciously, did this. You were looking for reasons to affirm your belief status, and you did so.
Yeah, I could definitely see how, from the way I just recalled those events, that it could be concluded that what happened was what do they call it? Self-fulfilling prophecy, or something about bias confirmation, or something along those lines. Yeah, all I can, yes, basically what I can just acknowledge that, yes, I hear where you're coming from.
So, and like I say, the difficulty is now, I mean, if you admit that, you are pretty much admitting that you don't actually know. It's just a further affirmation of your belief. It's not a knowledge. It's a deeper belief.
Well, I think at this point it might be necessary to actually, for me to define what is knowing, because people have asked me that, and I think that's a great question.
By the way, I'll put that verse in the side chat for you if you want to repeat it.
Yeah, it says, We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. And that's John chapter 6, towards the end of that chapter.
89, yeah. That's Peter. Sorry, Simon Peter.
And, you know, I have I mentioned this because I've chatted what I kind of just said to you, not in as full detail, but I brought up this verse. But, well, I've chatted with Matt Bell, and I have told him that I'm part Nishan. And, you know, to him, it's just, that's something that he's not really on board with. And I
can imagine.
And I brought up this verse to him. And
but then again, did he swear at you when he said it? When you said it?
No.
I'm joking. He has a bit of a mouth sometimes.
Yeah, he was fine. And but the thing is, I even brought this verse up to him, and he what he told me is that that's not actually what that verse even means. So,
Mike,
give me a second, please. Okay.
Sure.
So,
No problem.
I just
if you need to go and do other things, we can wrap it up if you wish. I think we've discussed a lot. I think you're still rolling around in this this argument that isn't going anywhere. You know, and I think it's good that you know it for yourself. But I still think you're in a situation where you can't demonstrate it. And unless you do, it's only a claim. And I think, and really, you know, it comes down to you have to be honest with yourself as well to say, yeah, I can understand, you know, yeah, it is only a claim, but I do believe it to be true. To my bones, or you know, right down to my bones, you know, that kind of thing. The essence that is me believes that.
Okay, and yeah, maybe I will get going, but I want to bring up one more thing. I don't want to. Let me just briefly touch on my definition of no.
Okay.
My personal definition of no maybe isn't necessarily JTB or RPPB, which I think is reliably produced true belief, which some people will say. This is something that I don't have a clear, that I don't believe God has like clearly formulated within me to, so basically what I'm trying to say is, what my definition of no is, it's not a concise definition. So it would seem like I'm just rambling words together. So in order to avoid that, I just want to make this point. And hopefully God will, I'm still waiting for God to give me a concise definition of what I could put forth as knowing. But anyway, so maybe in the coming days or whatever, weeks or whatever, I'll be able to give someone what my definition of no is.
You'll be going.
Mum's, eh?
Yeah, we have to go. We're gonna.
I understand. I think just to sort of say about your definition of knowledge, unfortunately, that does kind of hamstring the conversation a little bit, because unless we're both speaking the same language or having the same definition of a word, we end up talking past each other. So my concept of, you know, whenever you say I have knowledge, or you know something, then that would be based upon a traditional sense of what the word means. So I think we'd have to we'd have to obviously discuss it more and have another discussion another time, since you've got other things to do, obviously.
Well, I think that we could probably I think that I could probably touch on that definition and then try to make the other point, because I think my mom is just she kind of just gave me a pointer about something that I have to do maybe an hour from now. But for the time being, I don't have to go anywhere.
All right. Okay.
Okay. So if I were going to give my definition of no, allow me to give you a non-concise definition, but just try to get across the idea. I have this understanding in such a way where any piece of information that could affect the conclusion, that was relevant to the conclusion, I'm aware of those surrounding pieces of information as well. So if someone were to say, how do you know that you know? Well, my partitions or my definition of knowing would cover knowing that you know as well. It would be all-inclusive, and everything that's everything that would be related to being able to know. And then here's the kicker, is that by my definition, or what I actually believe is God's definition that I'm adopting, is that when one says they know something, there's no chance or opportunity for what they know to be wrong. What someone is claiming knowledge to, the object of their affection, let's call it, has to itself be true. So I do agree in part of when people say JTB, because they're saying T, truth. So that was a little...
The important thing to bear in mind here is that it's the other words. It's a justified true belief. Because it's not truth, it's just you believe it's true. You can't demonstrate it is truth. It is the truth. It is just your concept of the truth. That's where the problem lies.
Yeah, that's actually problematic in my opinion too, but not for myself, because since I do know, then I know that what I'm speaking about, like Jesus being God, I would be able to fulfill the criteria of, let's say, JTB, for example, because it is true that Jesus is God. How do I know it's true? Well, I have the ability to know it's true.
But that's circular. I mean, that's not justified. You haven't justified that you have the ability to know it's true yet.
And now this perfectly transitioned into the next point I wanted to make.
Okay.
Is that if I were even to say that what I'm saying is circular, which again is an issue that I don't accept, however, I'm more willing to just grant it now for the sake of conversation. If I were willing to grant, or let's grant that what I'm saying is circular, I know stuff because I have the ability to know stuff. How do you know you have the ability to know stuff? Well, since I have the ability, that would cover how I know I have the ability. Sounds circular, and I'll just say for the sake of conversation, let's call it circular. Now, here's where what Sai says comes into play, and this is something I agree with, is a vicious circle would be where one is forced to rely on their own reasoning, and they acknowledge within their own admission and reasoning that what they're saying is not necessarily true. That's why it's vicious, because the typical atheist G pluser, or what I perceive as the typical atheist G pluser, will be intellectually honest and admit, I don't know if what I'm saying is objectively true. It's only true according to my PBBs. That's why it's vicious, because the point here is that we're trying to get to
PvP.
a properly basic belief, PBB.
Oh, right, okay, right.
So, yeah, I kind of just shortened it to just say PBB. So the vicious part comes in is because the goal is to figure out what is the truth or the objective truth. But objective truth is synonymous with truth, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, it's worth pointing out that Saiten's wording of vicious circle is not a proper one, because it's effectively it's the sequence of the cause and effect, and that it basically goes around and it makes the situation worse. So the God exists, it says so in the Bible, so therefore God exists. That is a vicious circle. It doesn't matter whether you want to, whether you recognize whether it is or not. It is what it is.
Well, but here's how he claims himself. I just checked a video yesterday, and to the best of my memory and understanding, the way that he says he escapes a vicious circle is because his claim here, or the idea is, that God can reveal stuff to people in such a way that they could know it to be true. So
which, if I may interrupt, is basically saying it's not a vicious circle because I say so.
But here's his reason. His reason is because his end product is truth.
But he hasn't demonstrated it. So it's still a vicious circle. He hasn't demonstrated it's true. So he can't put it at the start in the first place. He can't say that, something is true because it's true, unless you demonstrate that it's true.
Yeah, and that's why when it comes to demonstrating something to be true, for example, Jesus did miracles, but miracles themselves, for many people alive right now, might not even be demonstrations, valid demonstrations. Someone might just say, wow, how the heck did this person do that? We're going to have to research that. And if I don't have any answer in this lifetime of how they did it, well, maybe they have some source of technology. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe
they're a conjurer.
Maybe they're a conjurer. And maybe they do have special powers, but that still doesn't necessarily mean that that person is God. So what I say is, why I say all that is because what is a demonstration? At the end of the day, people can always figure out a way to doubt. So it's like asking for a demonstration, in my opinion, is like, it's kind of just saying, convince me.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to do. Now, look, there are levels of convincing. If I say I had pork chops yesterday, do you have any reason to doubt me? Is this a normal thing that someone might have for dinner yesterday? Or I'm going to have pizza tonight. Sorry, I had pizza last night. Do you think there's a chance that I had pizza last night?
Yeah.
Now, would you call me on it and say, no, you didn't?
No, because that's not something I know, so I wouldn't have grounds.
Even so, it doesn't really matter whether you know or not. It really comes down to, is it really necessary? Well, no, and I mean, it could be true, it may not be true. It wasn't true, in fact. But whether it was true or not, it's not an extraordinary claim. You don't need it. You don't need, I don't need to give you, you don't really need to ask for demonstration. Now, if you really wanted to, then you could, and I would say, yeah, okay, well, here's the receipt, here's the thing right at the top of the cardboard thing. There's the cardboard box from what I had last night. Now, even if I can't prove that wasn't the day before, and that I just haven't put anything new in the bin since then. You know, it still doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It's just that I can't prove it happened. But the universe is not going to, survive and fall based upon whether or not I had pizza last night. You know, there's not a whole religious system based upon whether I had pizza. But there is a religious system based upon whether God exists. And unless someone can demonstrate that God exists, well, that's just a claim. And and anything that can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, and let's say that I can't demonstrate to anyone that what I'm saying is true. I think my point would still hold, that I can escape the vicious circle, because the problem, what I think the vicious circle is encapsulating, is not being able to know the truth. If someone can know the truth, they've escaped it. The reason why I believe atheists here on G Plus can't escape the vicious circle is because they can't know what the truth is by their own admission.
But me knowing that I had pizza last night, not that I did, but just say I did. Imagine I had pizza last night. Me saying I know I had pizza last night is exactly the same claim. You know? So how is it any different?
Well, if you say that you know you had pizza last night, let's go through it. What is no? Is it JTB?
Well, it's, I mean, it's a justified true belief based upon the presupposition of, proper basic belief.
Okay.
I exist, I've lived my life, I bought pizza, I stuck it in the oven, I put it on for 30 minutes, and then I ate it.
Okay. So let's say you know you had, is that what you want to go with? Is that the example?
Yeah, I know I had pizza last night. I mean, just like I say, I didn't have, the reality is I didn't have pizza last night, but imagine as a thought experiment, I did.
Okay. Then we could say, what's your justification?
Well, the fact that I'm not hungry, because I had pizza last night and I finished off the last of the pizza, and here, oh look, here's the box, and here's the receipt of me buying it last week.
Okay. And what is your, let me skip the T and go to B. So you've provided justification. Well, now what's your belief?
Well, there is no belief because, it happened. I suppose you could say I believe it happened, but I believe it happened because it did happen. There is knowledge involved in this.
Okay. So then,
now when it comes to you, and you basically say, okay, well, you had pizza last night. That's where you have the belief that I was telling the truth when I said I had pizza last night.
right.
So for me, it's the truth because I know it happened. Obviously, it is all still based upon the proper basic belief that I exist, you exist, the universe exists, the pizza existed, that I cooked the pizza, I ate the pizza, and I enjoyed the pizza.
And here's where the issue lies with me, is to fulfill the criteria of truth in that equation. JTB equals knowing. So we covered J, we covered B, now let's try to cover T. Well, but what is the truth?
No. Oh, now I've got someone at the door. Excuse me. I'll be a couple of moments. Tell them to go away as well. Sorry about that. You had your mum, I had some cold caller and I told them to go away. Yeah, anyway, okay, so I forgot where we were talking about now. Yeah, the justified true belief part. So, yeah, you see, the problem is it comes down to the belief part, that you can't say that you have knowledge based upon a belief. You really can't, because unless you demonstrate that your belief is true, then it isn't knowledge.
So how do we demonstrate that it's true that you had pizza last night?
Well, I can only demonstrate a certain amount of facts, but those facts we take on a certain amount of, we could call it faith if you like, that why would I lie? Do I have a reason to lie? It doesn't really make sense for me to lie about something as minor as having pizza last night. But it would be, it would be a bad idea to, to assert that, you have knowledge of something beyond the normal, unless you can demonstrate you have knowledge of something beyond the normal.
Okay.
If I said it's the old kind of idea of if I say I've got a unicorn in my back bedroom, and you would say, okay, prove it, and I say, no, you can't prove that I don't. Well, that's I'm not supporting my claim. But if I take you in my back room and say, there you go, there's a unicorn. Oh right, yeah, you're right.
Okay. Well, let's say that we saw that unicorn.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we saw it, how would we know that it is truly there?
Are you talking about beyond the proper basic belief that the universe exists, I exist, you exist, the unicorn exists? I mean, I'm talking about you coming over to my home and going in my back room and seeing the unicorn here.
Yeah, see, that's, let me not be that abstract for the moment. And let me just say, even adopting these properly basic beliefs, how would we know that there's truly a unicorn there, as opposed to maybe something in our perceptions falsely giving us the impression that there's a unicorn there?
Well, that comes down to the proper basic belief thing, doesn't it? Do you rely? Are you able to rely on your senses? And that includes yourself being able to rely on your senses that you were given knowledge, or that you read the Bible and that bit of John 6 struck a chord.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It comes back to the PBBs, but
yeah,
there are people that exist in this world that we know of, that they've hallucinated. They have, some people are even some people have Alzheimer's. Some people have like dementia. I don't know exactly what the difference is.
I can give you an example. The whole idea of the near-death experience thing. That now we know that when people start losing blood or the body starts shutting down, that people can hallucinate and dream things. But we've also seen experiments done in the 1960s, I think it was, with LSD, which produced exactly the same thing. In fact, I remember watching an Atheist Experience episode, and a young lady phoned up and she said that she had a near-death experience. But because she's an atheist and a sci-fi nerd, she went through the Stargate and met Klingons and things. You know, so her effectively built-in belief system, her belief system, brought out imagery based upon that belief system. And if you look at near-death experiences, Muslims that go through it, they meet Allah, and Christians meet Jesus, and so on.
Yeah. And so people can have, but even in someone's waking moment, even if they're not having a near-death experience, I used to work at a place where there were adults, even ranging up maybe to the age of 50. And my boss told me that some of these people, or maybe even most, if not all of these people, their mental state is not past that of like an 8-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And these were 50-year-olds walking around. And I worked there, I was chatting with these people. And so even in our real world, there are people whose cognitive faculties, I want to call them, instead I'll just call them perceptions.
Well, I mean, those perceptions, I mean, I've got a friend who's partially sighted. She basically has perforated vision. It's like she's got blinkers on. Her eyesight is poor. She can't see things very far, very easily. She's got a white stick and everything, so she feels around, for bumps and things like that she might not detect. She's effectively, got a diminished sensory perception. And other people have similar things, they may be a bit deaf or deaf completely blind, may not be able to speak or whatever, but that's not a sensory perception, that's more an expressionary one. But, now, they're able to take in a certain amount of senses. How do you sense that God gave you knowledge? How do you experience that? How do you, I mean, I think you've already answered it, really. The problem is, how do you justify that? That's really, this is the magic part, isn't it? It's how do you justify that you have knowledge?
Well, the way that I justify it is something that I'm willing to say for the moment. I'm willing to grant for the moment. Really uneasy granting this, but let's just say I'll grant that it's circular. Now, I'm not saying it is circular, but I
think you did earlier, to be honest.
Well, I
you
don't.
believe it works, but you do recognize that it is circular.
Well, here's the issue, though. Let's say that there was let's say God, for example, himself. Or let's just take me, for example. You asked for my justification.
Yeah.
So if we take me and I just know the truth, I'm just a being that knows the truth. Again, not all of it, but there are, I'm wired in such a way where there are actually some things that I just know the absolute truth about. Now, if someone wants to tell me, how do I know that I know the absolute, how do I know that I'm wired that way? How do I even know that I have that ability? If someone were to ask me that, if I were to answer their question by appealing to myself, let's call it circular. However, it doesn't invalidate that I know the truth. So something can be circular, but that really doesn't mean anything. That something can be circular and still not invalidate the truth?
No, because I still think you would need to justify that it's, the first position you have.
And the way that it would be justified, let's just even say, would be a circular justification. However, me being someone that knows the truth, I know that I know the truth. And if I justify it in a circular way by saying, how do I know the truth? Or how do I know that I know the truth? I know that I know the truth because that's something I know. I know that I know.
That doesn't tell me any. That doesn't actually say anything. That's just, I know that I know that I know that I know that I know. But you haven't demonstrated how you know anything.
And here's the kicker, is that even though it might be circular, even though it might be an infinite regress, it still doesn't change the fact that I know the truth.
Okay, so how is that any different than me saying I know that unicorns exist, and because I know unicorns exist, they exist?
Here's the difference, is that the atheists here on G+ are intellectually honest, and they admit, I don't know the truth.
But how can you admit that you don't know the truth? How do you know? You can't. You haven't demonstrated you have the truth, let alone that you know the truth.
You're right. I haven't demonstrated it, but that doesn't mean that I don't know the truth.
Okay, so until you demonstrate it, you're just making a claim. And if you can make a claim, I can just dismiss that and claim and say, no, prove it.
Well, until I demonstrate it, I'm not convincing anyone of what I'm saying. But that my failure to convince someone does not speak to the untruthfulness of what I'm saying.
Well, it just means you've made a claim, but you haven't justified it. And unless you do, why should I take it seriously?
I agree with you.
So, you see why this is a problem for you.
No.
Well, it is a problem because, if you're just going to say something, well, how does that mean, that is exactly the same level as me saying it's true unicorns exist. Unless I demonstrate that they do exist, then it's just a claim and you can dismiss it if you wish.
But the key component here is that when comparing, let's call it the Christian Presup argument or claims, when you compare that and those people know the objective, they know the truth. Now, are they demonstrating it per se? No. But that doesn't...
If you're referring to the Psi 10 one, he refuses to demonstrate. Because even when you ask him, he says, I don't do Bible studies. Where did you get this knowledge? Got it from the Bible. I don't do Bible studies with atheists. In fact, he doesn't even say, I got it from the Bible.
But
he revealed to me in a way I know it to be true, and he never demonstrates what that revelation was, in what form it came. And the reason why he doesn't is because he knows that as soon as he does, all the dominoes are falling all over the place. It no longer works.
Well, look, but the issue here is not whether he can convince people. The issue is, does he have a path to truth?
Well, yeah, but you see, the problem is, look, I mean, you say he knows. How do you know that he knows? How do you know he's not just lying?
Well, he personally might be lying, but the things that he's saying are actually true. Like, he might be let me reword that. Let me reword that in this way. $5 really does exist. If I tell you I have $5, I could be lying to you, but $5 really does exist. So in the same way, he's putting forth a worldview that is really true, but he could be lying that he actually has received this revelation.
Okay, but see, there's a difference between, conflating God with $5. Well, we know $5 exists. I can demonstrate that $5 exists. You can demonstrate $5 exists. I can demonstrate this glass exists. Now, but I can't demonstrate Godzilla exists. I can't demonstrate that that unicorns exist, because these are fantastical claims, and extraordinary claims, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Okay, let me put it to you like this.
Just claim something exists doesn't actually achieve anything.
Let me try to illustrate my point. Aliens, extraterrestrials, they might exist right now. Well, let me put it this way. Whether we demonstrate that they exist or not, the fact of the matter is either they exist or they don't. So let's just say hypothetically that they do exist, but we can't demonstrate that they exist. In the same way, Psi holds the truth, he just can't demonstrate it.
But there's a difference there, isn't there? Because one of them is a possibility of something may exist, and the other one is an assertion that something does exist. And unless you demonstrate that it does exist, then it's just a hypothesis.
Okay, let me come up with a new example. There is okay, I'm trying to come up with an example to you of how something is true, but I can't demonstrate it to you. Maybe you can be in on this as well. What is something we could come up with an example with of where it's true, but we can't? Okay, you know what? Let's think of, okay, evolution. Scientists say that evolution is true.
Okay, I don't know enough about evolution to really argue from a, but the thing about it is that it has been demonstrated.
But I and you, if we were to walk the streets telling people that evolution is true, and someone were to tell us to demonstrate to them that it were true, we would be incapable of demonstrating it.
Yeah. I mean, we could certainly give them the basic theory, but when it comes down to it, there are people that are far more qualified than you and I that can demonstrate it. Demonstrate the facts of it, because evolution is a theory built upon a mountain of facts.
Well, there might be people in the world that exist right now that could possibly demonstrate that God exists, or that they know that God exists. However, Psi just might not be one of those people that can do it.
Okay, well, until they do demonstrate it exists, then, why should we take it seriously?
Yeah, we don't have to take it seriously, but that doesn't negate that, like, for example, there's technology. Okay, that doesn't negate that they're the truth. It doesn't negate the truth. Just because someone doesn't choose, let's even say they're choosing, they are purposely choosing not to demonstrate it for people. They want to have that. They want to hide the truth for themselves. Just because they're not demonstrating it, that doesn't in itself somehow prove that they don't have the truth.
So we shouldn't take it seriously then?
Right. We shouldn't take it seriously. However, if you want to say then that they don't have the truth, we can't make that leap.
Well, we don't base our lives on what something might be, that hasn't been demonstrated. Do you, I mean, we'll go to unicorns again. Do you accept that unicorns exist?
Do I?
Or whatever. I mean, whatever fantastical thing we can create. Do we can we just assert that exists until someone says, no, you haven't demonstrated that it doesn't exist, so therefore it does exist?
Right. We shouldn't. I don't think we. Maybe this is preferential, but me personally, I'm a skeptical type of person. I wouldn't just believe something until it's proven to be wrong.
And have you proven it to be right yet?
So okay, most people would probably say it has not been proven to them that Psi knows that the Christian God exists. Psi hasn't demonstrated this to people. So most people would say he hasn't proved it. Like Aaron Ross said, until you show it, you don't know it. But actually, what I'm trying to say is Aaron Ra can't say that Psi doesn't know it. All Aaron Ra can say is, I don't believe that you know it.
Well, he can't demonstrate he does know it. And if he doesn't demonstrate it, then he can't make the claim that he has it. I mean, he can make the claim, but we just don't have to take it seriously.
But how about this? Would you say that maybe he does know the truth, but I'm not going to believe it because he's not demonstrating it?
Okay, let me explain a concept for you. Okay, so I've said this in your Hangout before, but I'll say it for anybody who hasn't seen it already. So imagine I tell you that vampire unicorns exist. Vampire unicorns are, unicorns that suck blood. Okay, and what they do is, they basically pierce. Usually they go after cows and things. What they do is they pierce them with their horn, and they suck their blood. That's how they survive. Okay, that's what they do. Now, very, very few people know vampire unicorns exist. Obviously this is a thought experiment. Okay, so vampire unicorns exist. Okay, and that it's important that you recognize that they exist, because if what really pisses them off the most is when people say they don't exist. It's really offensive when someone says you don't exist, so they get really pissy about it, and they're vampire unicorns, so they're especially pissy about it. And if they find out that that you don't believe, they will pierce you with their horn and suck your blood, and you'll be dead. So it's important that you recognize, because you don't want to be dead after all, right? So what happens is I just tell you that vampire unicorns exist. It's important that you believe they exist. Are you going to believe they exist?
No.
Now, that's because I haven't given you a reasonable justification for it. Now, if I show you photos and bodies, and and I say, look at these photos, look at this video, okay? This is a cow or a person, and you can see that there's a single horn in it, and it's got a spiral in it, because that's what vampire unicorns look like. And all around the body there's hoof prints, and when you look you sometimes find fur, you find hair in there, and it's like horse hair, but it's what no other horse looks like. It's they've tested it with DNA and things like that, and it's like no other horse that's ever that anybody knows exists. So I've now given you evidence that vampire unicorns exist or may exist. It's like, that's fairly convincing. I don't know whether I completely believe it, but it's certainly convincing. It's certainly better than me saying, yeah, you just need to believe. You know, that's where the justification is. That's where, you know, you demonstrate something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One is a fantastical claim on its own with no justification, with no evidence, no proof of any kind. It's just, yeah, I'm making this assertion and I expect you to believe it. And then another one is, you know, that plus evidence on the top of it.
Yeah, and personally, the more evidence that would come in, the more maybe I would be prone to believing it. However, even I would say to myself that regardless of what I believe, doesn't change whether the vampire unicorn really exists or not.
But it still comes down to, I've given a justification for it. Now, whether you'll be totally convinced or whether you'll be on the fence, you're a vampire unicorn agnostic, you know, it still comes down to there is a demonstration. Now, how do you demonstrate you have knowledge?
Okay, a demonstration doesn't change. Doesn't change the fact of the matter.
Well, when you say fact of the matter, how can you demonstrate it's a fact? You need to provide evidence for the assertion. Otherwise, I can just dismiss it, and I think you would accept that it's fair that I should do this,
Okay.
or I would be able to do this.
Okay. Before people could demonstrate that the moon or other galaxies existed. Let's take other galaxies.
Okay.
Before people could demonstrate that other galaxies existed, or before people could, let's take this one, before people could demonstrate that black holes existed, or that supernovas occurred, before people could demonstrate this, supernovas still occurred as a fact. Yeah. So, and that was with no demonstration at all.
But and yes, but the problem is that unless it's demonstrated, then it's just a claim. And, you know, you're right. It doesn't change the truth,
right,
that galaxies exist. But unless you're able to demonstrate it, it's just a hypothesis at that point. And hypothesis is not based upon, you know, a proper, an actual knowledge of something. It's only based upon a maybe. And so at that point, your claim of having the truth is a maybe. It's a possibility.
Well,
I know that you believing you have the truth, but that's only a subjective viewpoint. It's not an objective viewpoint. I can't see that you have the truth.
Okay, well, yeah, I can't, at least at this point in time, I don't see how I could demonstrate that I know that I know stuff. I was about to say that I know Jesus is God, but to keep it even more a little bit complicated, I don't see how I could demonstrate that I know that I know. I don't see how I could demonstrate that. However, my failure to demonstrate doesn't reflect the fact of the matter.
but you still are in the difficult situation that you have. If in order for you to expect people to take it seriously, then you need to demonstrate it.
And here's the issue, is that the presuppositional Christian argument is merely pointing out that they have now it's like this. We don't have to actually believe that their God even exists. We don't have to believe that their God even exists. But what they're pointing out is, if our God existed, we would have a way to know the truth. Whereas they then put their sights on the, let's call it, atheist G plus population. And in that point of view, coming from that point of view, the people, by and large, in my recollection, admit that they don't even have an avenue. They don't even have a way to know. They don't even have a way. Now really quickly, let me qualify that, because people say, well, we do have a way, because if our PBBs are true, then we can know things. And they're trying to equate that with saying, if God is true, then you can know things. But that's not an equal equation. Here's why. Is because one if could never be, it can't, I don't want to say never, but currently there is no way to see there's no way to validate that if. On the atheist G plus perspective, there's currently no proposed way to go about validating that if. So it remains an if. And it, for the foreseeable future, will always remain an if. And since it will always remain in the realm of if, then they can't jump. They can never get to knowing, because it always remains an if. So they can never cross that. They can never build a bridge to knowing, because it's always an if. Whereas the Christians, it can start with an if. It can start with an if, but that if can become an is. And the way that it can become an is that the God can build that bridge. The God can build the bridge and say, look, I will give you the truth.
The difficulty is that you're using your reason to justify that reason, but you can't demonstrate that reason is justified in the first place. You're basically piling a load of assertions on top of a weak foundation. Unless you can demonstrate that foundation has any strength at all, then you're building a skyscraper on sand, and it's not going to be long before that skyscraper falls over.
Well, okay, I think you said that there's a lot of assertions that are being put forth, but I think it's okay to analyze those assertions, because
No, but you're putting the cart before the horse. You can't just say, oh, well, I'm going to assert something, and then, and then assert something else, and assert something else, and assert something else, and there you go, that works. Well, no, you haven't demonstrated that your first foundation is justified beyond a proper basic belief that we exist.
What's the first foundation that you want to be just?
The proper basic belief. So, we have our proper basic belief that, we exist. A pragmatic approach, effectively, that we exist. You exist, I exist, the universe exists, that we're able to gain knowledge from talking to each other, experiencing, touching things and feeling the temperature in the air and, tasting the senses that we have. Those things we use as tools to experience the universe around us. Now, we all do this. The only difference between you and me is you've placed, you've put another layer to the onion and said, "Oh, God did it." Well, unless you can justify that layer, then it's just a claim.
Okay, here's how. God can make people know that God can provide a justification for people's properly basic beliefs.
Okay, now you've made an unqualified assertion there. You need to. You've made an unsubstantiated assertion there. In order to make such an assertion, you have to demonstrate that God exists.
Okay. Well,
can you demonstrate that God exists?
No, I don't think I can.
Okay, so in that case, I can just dismiss everything.
I think you can dismiss it as far as it being real, but I don't think you can dismiss the hypothetical.
Well, why should I? The hypothetical doesn't make it true or valid. I can, putting the vampire unicorns as an assertion, an unfounded assertion, it does exactly the same thing.
Okay, let's take vampire unicorns.
Mm-hmm.
If a vampire unicorn made you know that your properly basic beliefs were true, then there you go.
Well, that's not the argument. The argument is simply that a vampire unicorn exists. But in order for you to say that God can let you know, you would have to demonstrate that God exists. God has these powers: omniscience, omniscience, omnipotence, omniscience, can give you the ability to know anything, and that you can actually use that knowledge. So you've basically got 4 assertions, all built upon the first one. You've got 3 assertions based upon the first one, and you haven't demonstrated the first one. Yeah. So until you demonstrate that God exists, you can't even make the assertion that He can give you knowledge. You can only claim it.
Okay, let me. A new example came to my mind.
Okay.
One of my hobbies is building basketball teams. What sport do you watch, if any, or ever?
I watch a bit of NFL. I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan.
Okay, so one thing that I like to do is, oh wow. So one thing that I like to do is basically be like a manager, and I like to put together a team.
Mm-hmm.
So when putting together a team, you don't actually have those players yet, but you can think ahead in the future. Okay, so I could say to myself, if I had a good quarterback, and if I had a good quarterback, well, let's say this. If I had a good quarterback, and if I had a good wide receiver, then I could have an offensive threat, because my quarterback and my good wide receiver, they're good. They would be effective at advancing the ball.
Yeah.
Now, do I have those things yet? No, I don't have them yet. But I can imagine these things and to kind of lay a plan, a foundation. So in the same way, God doesn't have to exist yet. Someone can say, that if I had a God that could make me know the truth, then I would know the truth. So I'm trying to say how you can do this mental thing without, the same way I can build a team, I don't actually have to have those players on my team yet.
Yeah, but here's the thing: what you're starting, you are creating under this same scenario. You're creating the game. You haven't demonstrated that football, basketball exists yet, let alone the ability to create players and create strategies based upon things. The whole foundation is that that the game exists.
Well, that's like NASA when they don't know if other life inhabiting or giving potential planets exist. They don't know if those things, if other planets exist like that, to the best of my current understanding of what NASA has found. They don't know if there's other life supporting planets. But they can say, I don't know if this thing exists, but we can still imagine that if it did exist, then this and this and this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hypothesis. We say, okay, we have detected 256 planets because they've been doing that. They now have the ability to look at the wobble, and they can figure out the distance from the star that a planet is. And if it's in the Goldilocks zone, the point where it's not too cold, not too hot, not too cold, that life could propagate itself there. Now, whether there is life on that planet, who knows? Whether there is intelligent life on that planet, who knows? But you can create a hypothesis around it. Doesn't make it true yet. Until you've demonstrated it is true, it's just a hypothesis. And I see the God question in the same regards. Unless it's been demonstrated to be true, more than just I'd like it to be true, I want it to be true, it's a belief that I have. Well, it would be nice for me to win the lottery. It doesn't mean to say it's going to happen or has happened. But the fact that the lottery exists doesn't increase the possibility of me winning it, other than me buying more tickets. That's what increases it. If I don't buy a ticket, I don't win the lottery.
Okay, well, just to get back to the Goldilocks zone, we haven't demonstrated that another life support, to the best of my massive knowledge, they haven't demonstrated that another life supporting planet exists, but we could still imagine it and then draw maybe we could still imagine it, and we could still maybe draw some possible things that might follow from it if it did exist. So
it's a hypothesis, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing is, even if we have no demonstration yet that this planet exists, that another life-supporting planet exists, it is a fact that there is one out there now, or there is not.
Well, you see, I mean, a fact is a point of data which is either not in dispute, or it is indisputable that it is objectively true. Objectively verifiable, sorry.
Well,
yeah, so that's not quite the same thing. A hypothesis is a potentially falsifiable explanation, one that includes predictions as to what different test results should imply about it.
Right.
That's
Okay.
quite different than a belief or what was the word you used? An imagination. Imagination is not the same thing as a hypothesis, because imagination is my example of vampire unicorns or elves or any other creature you want to make up.
Okay.
So not quite the same thing.
How about this? If I say, if the Christian God exists, then he can make people know the truth. And then you want to say, well, first you have to demonstrate he exists.
Yes.
I'll try to liken that to if there's another planet out there that can support life, then it could be the case that we could land on it.
Yeah.
So we don't even know that this planet exists. However, if such a planet does exist, then maybe we can land on it. So the fact that we don't know if it exists or not doesn't really hinder us from being able to talk about being able to land on it.
Well, yeah, but that's the hypothesis, isn't it?
Right. We could say if there's another, because some planets are just gaseous, maybe you can't land on gas. So if there's another rocky planet out there that has a surface that is landable upon, like it's a rock surface, and it supports life, and if it has the type of atmosphere that will allow us to get in, like if there's another planet like that, then we can go and land on it. But I think it's cool and it's okay to say, let's think about landing on it, even if we don't even know if it exists yet. We could still talk about it.
Well, usually the way that they do these things is once they've found it and looked at it, then they decide that they're going to land on it. So effectively they go through a chain of expeditions, shall we say. You found it existed. We think it might exist. We're going to go and have a look. So we send a probe out there and find, yep, there is a planet there, and that it has plant life in it. But we can't see any animal life on, so we'll go and have a look. But first, we need to make sure that human beings can live there. I mean, it would be a bad idea to go to a new planet and not have spacesuits and, think, oh, well, it's got an oxygen, nitrogen atmosphere, we'll land on it and see, yeah, but what pathogens might exist that we are not capable of withstanding? You remember the old War of the Worlds thing, the aliens come from Mars, and the, and the germs that we have grown to be resistant to, they have never experienced before, and so they die from. In fact, the problem we have right now is that we're getting germs that are getting hard to kill with antibiotics. But really, the whole point, the God hypothesis, remember, it has, it's potentially falsifiable explanation, but you can't really falsify God.
Well, I think that the Christian God could be falsifiable.
In what way?
I believe that if scholars could and historians could, of course this is subjective, but if they could present some evidence that strongly persuaded people that Jesus didn't raise again from his death, if people, if they could, if they found the body of Jesus, then I think that would serve as a potential way to falsify Christianity.
What if Jesus didn't exist, and the character that we have is based upon 2 or 3 people who did exist, and they basically conglomerated them together as a single character? You know, this is a problem. You now have, it's now dismissed the possibility of of the scenario you just presented.
Well, you can't actually, since you don't know, since you don't know if Jesus existed or not, it would seem to me that you can't really, in order to say the claim that you just said, you would have to, first, you would have to demonstrate that Jesus didn't exist.
Yeah. But then again, we haven't got a demonstration that he did exist yet, other than, a book written by people. And the only things that are, outside of the Bible are Josephus and Tacitus, neither of which, and really, I mean, one of them is just a bit saying, yep, there was a great fire of Rome, and the Christians were blamed for it. And Josephus was just a few, paragraphs, really, saying, yep, there's these Christian people, and they believe in this guy. But it doesn't demonstrate that Jesus was God, doesn't demonstrate walking on water, performing sins, right? Dying for sins, rising up from the dead. It doesn't provide any of those things.
Okay, well, just I actually was just using your line of reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
I was piggybacking off of your line of reasoning, which is why I said that you can't even discuss the possibility that Jesus didn't exist unless you can first demonstrate he didn't exist. I don't necessarily believe that. I was just merely putting that forward because that's how you that's what you it seems to me that's kind of the way that you think about things. So, but to answer that though, I believe that the consensus of scholars, be they religious or not, is that there was one guy named Jesus of Nazareth.
Well, it was Joshua, I think his name was, or something like that. I can't remember what the name was now. I forgot the name. It was something like that. Joshua. I can't remember. Joshua. Yeah, doesn't matter. I mean, we're still stuck in this infinite regress, though. That you can't demonstrate God exists, and until you demonstrate God exists, we're still going around in this circle. That it's just an assertion. You're just making an assertion, and until you demonstrate it, it is an assertion. Now, it's okay. I said this to Spoken last week on your Hangout, and I said I would rather have someone say, I just believe this is true. I believe it in my bones, or whatever you want to call it. I believe my conviction is that I believe this is true. I can't prove it, but it's my faith. And when someone says that, I'm okay with that. I don't agree with it, but I'm okay with that. At least I find that honest. But, unless someone, really you saying that you know something to be true, for me, you're making a claim that you can't verify. And, we're really not going anywhere. We're really going around and around at the moment. I'm getting a little bit tired, to be honest, as well. Didn't sleep very last night. Unfortunately, the building I live in, it's going to refurbishment, and I've had people drilling on the walls and things first thing. So,
okay. Well,
should we have another chat another day?
Well, yeah, we could plan for. We could say that. Yeah, I mean, I can't make an exact plan for it, but yeah.
No, we'll just work something out sometime. It might be just as simple as me. I come on your channel, we have a chat or something. Whatever.
Okay.
One thing that I should make you aware of, though, you really should look at the Van Til Presup argument, because that's an actual presuppositional argument. It's not a game. It's not a trick or, that kind of thing. The Sci-10 one is a trick. It's nothing more than a ploy to shut mouths. And the ploy is basically, if I make you justify your position, you can't be asking me questions about, what about this bit in Leviticus? What about this bit in there? What about this contradiction in the Bible, and so on? It's an attacking posture. But really, when you look at it deeply, it just comes down to it's an assertion that hasn't been demonstrated, and as such, it can be dismissed. If you want to watch a video, watch him talking to Matt Dillahunty, and he goes through it there.
Yeah.
But like I say, there are much better arguments than Sci-10 Kate's. I'll be frank, it is a dishonest argument. There's a video on Alex Bottom's channel of them talking, and it really doesn't go anywhere. And as soon as there are some simple defeaters to it. Can you be can you be sure of anything? Well, I know I'm not your God. How do you know that? Well, if I was your God, then I could be planting the idea in your head.
Well, I personally don't think that. I personally have a rebuttal to that, though.
I can't remember the argument completely. It's more nuanced than that. But either way, it's a really bad argument. And my simple answer to it is, if you have to presuppose God, then you can't have any evidence for it to begin with. And if you haven't got any evidence to begin with, then there's no reason for me to take it seriously. So I think we're going to finish now. Do you want to say anything before we sign off?
Well, I would like to share this video with people. I don't know.
Yep. You're welcome to share it. You can mirror it if you wish as well. That's perfectly fine.
What does that mean, mirror?
Basically, what you do is you download it, you put it on your channel, and you just have mirror, in the title or whatever. It allows your audience to see what you did on someone else's channel.
Oh, okay. So mirror doesn't affect the video quality at all. It's just an indicator that it was originally on someone else's channel.
Yeah.
Okay. How do people download videos?
There are bits of software. Do you use Firefox or Google Chrome?
Chrome.
I'm not sure with Chrome. I'm not very good with it. But you can. There's if you type in, I don't know. Maybe have a look in the. Maybe someone will leave something in the comments or set. I tell you what. Anybody who's watching, if you use Chrome and you download videos, send a message to MK. Give him some good software that can help him. YouTube download, as someone's already mentioned already. So yeah, type in YouTube downloader into Google, see what it hits. Put Chrome or something, Google Chrome, and see what happens. Usually you can download these bits of software. I use Firefox most of the time. I've got add-ons, so when I on the page, it will have a little download button. And so you click it and it can download it as an MP4 or even just an MP3, if you just want the audio extract.
Okay, actually, what I plan on doing though is to just basically maybe just go to your YouTube page and then just copy and paste that link and just paste that link on my G Plus page.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll stick on the site the link for it at the side chat for you. There you go.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Okay, well, we've had a fair number of viewers. It's been about 25 to 28 on average. So for everybody watching, thank you very much. I'm sure MK will say the same thing.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah.
And thank you for the conversation, MK. It's been very nice. Thank you very much.
Okay, you too. I appreciate it.